Hello, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation today, you can type them into the Q&A located on the bottom toolbar of your Zoom screen, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and those registered for Crop Talk will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Erin. I'd like to welcome everybody to the May 22nd edition of Crop Talk. I'd like to apologize for last week. I had some technical issues with the computer and just wasn't able to get all the right things going at the right time, so we had to cancel it. So last week we were going to talk a little bit. We had a lot of questions that had come in. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to get to some of those questions as we're going through the next couple of crop talks. Tried to pick a few of the ones that were more of the urgent ones that need answering for this one. And yeah, that's kind of what happened last week. This week we've got crop update, and then I got Dennis Lang coming on, and Dennis is going to talk about tips for planting and early season management of our soybeans and edible beans. It's kind of a timely one. We've got a lot of guys planting soybeans right now, and we also have some early planted ones that might be starting to poke through the ground, and so Dennis is going to give a little bit of information on that, and then answer a few questions. And what we're going to do is do a quick flip here where Dennis is going to start first, and then we're going to go into the crop update, and then there's some questions for our crop scouting panel after that. So I guess with that, Dennis, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's get going on our tips for planting.
All right, so I'm going to welcome. I'm glad to be here again this morning. It's a little cooler out this morning than what we've seen in the last few mornings, and we'll see how things progress here during the day, but seeding progress down in this neck of the woods has been going pretty good. So I'm just going to go into slideshow mode, and Lionel, you should be able to see my screen now. Is that correct?
You bet.
All righty, so let's get going. So first thing I want to kind of start off with, StatsCan came out with some numbers here about a month or so ago about projected planted acres, and I just kind of want to run through a few of these real quick just to kind of set the scene a little bit. Anything that's in green was an increase from the previous year. Anything that's in yellow is a decrease. So if you look at dry beans, for example, we're looking at about just over 200,000 acres, and those acres are a little higher than what we've seen in the past. Seems to be a lot of interest in growing dry beans again this year. Fall prices were good, yields were pretty decent last year, so we saw a lot more growers projected to plant more dry beans. The one that surprised me a little bit were soybeans. I expected soybeans to be a bit higher than what they were last year, and it looks like we're pretty flat compared to what we have been in the past, which is okay. I think part of that came down to the fact that we saw a lot of fertilizer went down last fall. I think a lot of growers maybe fertilized for canola, so those plans were already set. And then as this winter rolled through, canola prices dropped, and there was lots of discussion about maybe less canola acres just because of the prices. But early projections here is that canola acres are going to be up that 3.2 million acres, and soybeans are going to stay about that 1.5. So that just kind of sets the scene of where we're at here today. So we're going to roll into the next slide here. So the one thing I always like to talk about when you're talking beans, and whether that's soybeans or dry beans, is you like to see them twice in 1 week. And what I mean by that is you should see them once when you put them into the drill, and you should see them the second time for when they come out of the ground. Now, those are under ideal conditions, and from time to time we do see that happen. However, this year it's been a little cooler, so we're not going to see that 1 week emergence. But just for a whoops, I hit my button here a little quickly here. Just for a comparison here, if your soil is cold and wet, beans typically can come up slow and they can come up stressed. And we're talking soybeans in this particular instance, but it applies to dry beans as well. So if soil temperatures are steady at about 10 degrees, typically those beans take 15 to 17 days to really come out of the ground. With soil temperatures warmer, if you're in that 15 degree temperatures, they come up a lot quicker. So we're probably not at that 15 degrees Celsius at first thing in the morning, because our temperatures have been warm during the day, but they cool off at night. So We're expecting, 10 to, maybe up to 14 days, 15 days or so before they start to come out of the ground. One thing I'm just going to mention here, even though there's not frost in the forecast, but this is a question I get every year, is, can soybeans take a frost? A lot of that's going to depend upon the temperature and how long it stays cold. So there's some tolerance just with soybeans. So -7, or sorry, not -7, -1.7 to -1.1 for short periods of time if those seedlings are out of the ground. If it's been a little cooler and those beans are hardened off and they're all emerged, they can take a little bit colder temperatures. So there's probably a few fields that have starting to pop up in some of the early planted fields, but the majority of the fields I think should still be okay if we do happen to get a frost tonight. I don't think a lot of the beans are still in the ground yet. So fairly frost tolerant, but it all depends on where and how long it gets cold for and what temperature it gets down to. So some of the things that you look for if your beans are emerged and you want to see whether or not there's actual damage, what you need to look at here is just at the hypocotyl here to see if that's pinched off. If that's pinched off below the cotyledons, those plants are done. You can see here, this is from some frost damage from a couple of years ago, where you can see how they're kinked off just below the cotyledons here. Those plants are pretty much done, whereas these plants up in here still look healthy. So I think you just have to assess that if you do see some frost damage. Okay, so if you do get frost damage and it's above the cotyledons, what can happen is you'll get some regrowth from the axillary buds. That regrowth you won't see till probably about a week later. So again, having a frost, if you end up getting a frost, probably best not to go look for a day or two just to see if there is any damage, and then try to give it about a week and see how it does regrow, because typically they do regrow quite nicely for soybeans. Dry beans, a little bit more sensitive, and you don't tend to see as much regrowth there, but it's still possible that those plants will regrow. But dry beans right now, I think we're just in the midst of planting right now, so I don't expect any losses there. Most of the seed's still in the ground yet. So soybean seeding rates, a few things to kind of keep in mind. First thing you need to keep in mind is what are your targeted seeding rates. So if you're upwards of 200,000 seeds per acre in a 9-inch row, that's kind of ideal. You have to factor in seed survivability. At the end of the day, whether you're at in a narrow row situation or you're in a wide row situation, and a lot of growers that are planting in a 30-inch row are dropping their seeding rates to 180,000. Irregardless of what you start with putting in the ground, what you want to end up with is you want to end up with that 140 to 170,000 plants per acre established in soybeans. That's kind of the magic range. So about a month after planting, you want to go out with your hula hoop and you want to do some counts and you want to see where you're at. It's really important to kind of do that, because I think you need to have an assessment of your seed quality. You need to have assessment of your seeding equipment as well. But what happens if, let's say, you have a dry seed lot and the seed gets banged up and you end up with only 80,000 plants? Well, in soybeans, that's okay, we'll say. But what you'll have to do is you'll have to really keep that field clean through the growing season, which means multiple applications of glyphosate to keep that field clean. I've seen stands as low as 60,000 plants per acre still put off 40 to 45 bushels an acre if it's kept clean. With the dry bean, if you're dropping a plant population that much compared to what you planted, that's a little different scenario, because there you're going to end up with, you don't have the weed control and the plants don't recover quite as nicely. So, but in a soybean stand, worst case scenario, if you were down to 80,000 plants, I would still leave the field, keep it clean, spraying it through the season just to keep the weeds out of there, and you should still be okay. But generally, if you're on top of your seeding rates, you should be okay with your normal planting rates and with no damage loss. I haven't heard of any damaged seed this year. Some years we're going into seeding knowing that we have some dry seed lots. This year, I think we're in pretty good shape. Okay, so when you go out with your hula hoop about a month later, what should you be seeing? So here's that 8-inch row spacing, and this is 102,000 plants per acre. Now, Here, you know, just with this particular unit that I'm using here, you can see it's not evenly spaced, but when you do your stand counts, that's what 102,000 plants look like. This is what over 200,000 plants per acre look like. It doesn't look like a whole lot here, but generally this is probably more than you need. By the time those plants get bigger, they'll fill in that space. They'll compensate for that space. So here, this is a little higher, and of course, this is way too high. If you end up with something like this, this is one of those seed drops that in a corner of the field. But this is, I would say, this was a tad on the high side. So. For soybeans, typically 3/4 of an inch to 1.25 inches is kind of the ideal planting depth. This year, most areas have gotten good moisture, so that should be the targeted range that you're in, that you should try to shoot for. In some years when it's drier, growers have gone down to 2 inches. We'll see a lot slower emergence and possibly reduced stand. If you're dealing with drier conditions, you know, you can go down to a little deeper. 2 inches a little bit much, but given that we're getting towards the end of May here, if you have to go down that deep, you should still get pretty good emergence, considering, you know, how later in the season we are compared to if you were planting on May 1st. If you a few of the other things just to keep in mind, you don't want to see too shallow, because that is something that some growers have made mistakes from in the past, where they've gone down, they're expecting rain, they go to 1/2 inch, and because, you know, they're expecting that rain, and then it dries, you don't get that rain, and you have seed that's sitting in soil that has some moisture, but what can happen is it might not be enough to continue the growing process. It might be just enough to swell up, and then if you don't get that moisture, the seed desiccates and dies off. So that's why it's always good to get seed into moisture when you're talking about soybeans here. So rolling soybeans is something where it's starting to get a few questions on. Ideally, you want to be rolling within 3 days after seeding. Ground should be dry, firm. You're rolling for stones, dirt lumps, corn stalks, and help to reduce any earth tag if you're growing a conventional soybean. Some years, though, if it is a little drier, growers have elected to wait and roll after the beans are up. Now, the one question I got from a producer here just recently was that the beans were seeded just over a week ago, and is it still safe to roll? Well, the first thing I asked the grower is, are there any beans popping out of the ground yet? And the answer to that question was no. Then I asked the grower are there any trees around the field where you can check to see if there is any emergence there? Because typically where there's a bit of a shelter belt, those soybeans will come up a little bit quicker. And he checked those areas and it was fine. So in that situation, he did go and roll because the beans were still in the ground yet, and no risk of damaging that hypocotyl. The worst time to be really to rolling is if those beans are popping out of the ground. So for example, if you look at this image in the top left corner, if those beans are kind of at that hook stage, just pushing through like that, or in the bottom right corner here, that's where you should not be rolling, because there you're going to create a lot of damage to the seedling. What I would suggest doing is waiting until you get to at least the unifoliate stage, but ideally the trifoliate stage. And the reason I say trifoliate, or is that grouping of the first 3 leaves, is that once you're at the trifoliate stage where that leaf is open, that tells me that all the other beans are up and out of the ground by now. You can roll at the unifoliate stage once they're up. And the only thing is, if there are any beans at the hook stage, you could potentially risk some damaging that seed. A couple other things to kind of keep in mind if you choose to roll after the beans are up. Number one, you want to be rolling on a hot day. 25 degrees and higher is ideal because those plants will bend back. You want to be rolling in the afternoon. Even though, let's say you have a morning where you're up to 25 degrees by 10 o'clock, those beans aren't quite warm enough yet, and you'll probably still see some damage there. So I would definitely wait till the afternoon until those plants are pliable. And we're going to move to the next slide here. Okay, so if you do some post-rolling or post-emergent rolling, and you see this plant here that is broken, Those plants there, whoops, sorry about that. It's just clicking a little too easily here. Those plants there are damaged. And you can see here, there might be some regrowth because the cotyledons are below that. So you'll probably see some regrowth there. But if you have damage like that, you need to do your stand count and see where you're at. And I think that's another importance of doing a stand count, knowing how many plants you start with. Because if you're getting 160,000 plants per acre and you're losing 2 or 3% of those, that's still pretty good. If, however, you had 160,000 plants per acre and you're at 30%, well, that's a different story. There you might need to wait a little bit till things warm up a bit before you can go ahead and continue to roll once the beans are up. A few things I just kind of want to mention. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just to kind of talk about some of the things to watch for this summer here. Water hemp is something that is out there, and you can see here by the map we have 10 RMs that are confirmed to have water hemp in it. There's a really great article in Seed Manitoba. You can read up about how to scout for it, what to look for, those types of things, and how to address it through your weed control programs. But it is something that you need to be aware of and watching for throughout the season. Last summer, we had some calls here where growers had grown Extend soybeans, did not spray the dicamba the first pass over when it felt that maybe it was cost prohibitive. Didn't realize it had such a bad problem with water hemp in that field. And then they came back here towards the end of June and sprayed plants that were way too big with the dicamba. So again, knowing if you have it in the field is one thing. If you are using these the new systems, the dicamba or the enlist systems, make sure you spray those products according to label, but spray that the dicamba and the enlist on the first pass, so that way you get some residual control there, and until the plants are able to compensate for that. So, couple quick final points here. Scout after every herbicide application when it comes to soybeans, before and after, to make sure you know what weeds are there and what weeds you may have missed, and watch your field as the crop matures, making sure that there's no weed escapes there. That's how some of these water hemp finds were found last year, is that people were out there scouting for it. The use of pre-emergent with residual control products, using dicamba and enlist systems with glyphosate on the first pass is really important. Glyphosate alone now can run you into problems. There's enough issues now that, whether it's glyphosate resistant kochia or glyphosate resistant water hemp, that we really need to be aware of that. And that's kind of the message here, is just making sure that you're doing everything you can to control those weeds before things get out of hand. So let's move into dry beans. This is an older slide, but it just goes to show you the difference between edible beans and soybeans after a big major rain. So the yellow areas are dry beans, and the field right beside it is soybeans. And you can see how much of a difference soybeans just can really take that moisture much better than what dry beans can. So this slide I put up there, a lot of times for new growers that maybe haven't grown edibles before, just to kind of keep in mind that there's definitely some differences. And if you have a heavier soil like this is here, so dry beans on those heavy soils on wet years don't do very well. A few things to kind of keep in mind in dry beans. This is what would be represented is if a grower had grown soybeans in year 1, planted wheat in year 2, and went to dry beans in year 3. There's potential for volunteer soybeans to be coming up in those dry beans. Dry beans, soybeans are considered a food allergen, and for the buyer, they will actually reject loads that have soybeans in it. Now, in the past, the worst case I've ever seen in this, where grower had soybeans in year 1, wheat in year 2, followed by canola in year 3. But because of the year it was, the canola had gotten blown out with all the strong winds that we had, went back and planted dry beans and ended up with 10% volunteer soybeans in their harvested sample. That's an extreme event. A lot of times when I have seen it, it's been under 1%, and even there, that is a concern for the buyer as well. So I keep that in mind. Something else to keep in mind if you're growing different bean types, Just make sure that you're watching your rotation there. This is something where the producer had black beans in year 1 and then followed with pinto beans in year 2 for whatever reason, and you can see the admixture. And this could be, this is a concern for the buyers because it's difficult to separate those beans and still maintain the quality of the pintos. Because what ends up happening is, in order to guarantee that there's no black beans in there, you have to clean them fairly hard, and sometimes you'll lose some of the good quality beans, like some of these sports in here. So keep those kind of things in mind rotation wise. Always look back and make sure that there's no risk of contamination there. Some planting tips moving forward on dry beans. Again, 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches is kind of ideal. Dry beans like warmer soil. So unlike soybeans, where soybeans you can plant them earlier and they seem to perform quite well, even though they can sit in the ground for a lot longer and still make it through okay. Dry beans typically like it warmer soil. So we always say around the May long weekend, when soil temperatures start to warm up, ideally twice in 1 week is great. And we tend to see that when we plant dry beans in that, this time period right now. One thing you really need to monitor for is seed coat damage. And a lot of the dry bean seed comes from the US, and that seed is anywhere from 10 to 12% moisture. If you're running it through an air seeder and you don't pay attention to your air volume and you damage that seed, you can greatly reduce your stand counts. And again, doing a stand count about 4 weeks after to make sure you know where you're at. I always recommend to growers, if you're unsure of your seed quality, if you know it's dry but you're not sure if there's a lot of hairline cracks in it, take a small pan of water, fill it with about 1 inch of water, and drop 100 seeds in there from your seed lot, and just stir it around for 5 minutes and watch for any seed coat separation. If you zoom in, to this particular image here, and I'm going to see if I can do this here. We'll see. Whoops, didn't work that way. Okay, we're going to do shift. Yeah. And if you zoom in right down here, you can see some seed coat crack just starting to show up. And in the end, it is something that you need to make sure that if it's over 10%, you need to be increasing your seeding rate just to make sure that you're not going to run into any problems. What can happen is if you end up with a seed coat damage, you'll end up with what you see on the right here, which is called a bald head. You see this, basically it looks like a thumb. So that's where the main growing point's supposed to be. And when you're looking at a normal plant, that's what a normal plant should look like. Now in the soybean, you do see the odd one of those, but generally you don't see too many. In dry bean seed, you tend to see a few more just because the seed is a lot drier. Again, with an air seeder, just keep an eye on your air volume, make sure it's not too high. Check your cracked seed coats before you put it into the seed box to make sure it's low. And if it is on the higher side in that 15 to 20% range, you need to increase your seeding rate to compensate for that. So if you're doing some plant stand counts, and if you're in a row crop situation, if you're in a 30-inch row, you want to measure off 17 feet 5 inches. And you're doing this a month after emergence to determine what your plant population are. That will give you 1/1000th of an acre. If you're in a 22, it's 23 feet 9 inches. If you're solid seeded, then typically you can do a row count if it's a nice precise rows, or you can use a hula hoop method, and that will give you your plant population. What you're shooting for in dry beans. Now, this is suggested seeding rates. It's not live plants, because you want to, for example, when you're shooting for a pinto bean, for example, in 30-inch row, you're putting down 65 to 75,000 seeds per acre. When you're looking at, let's say, navy or black beans in a 9 to 12-inch row spacing, you're putting down 140 to 150,000 seeds per acre to end up with around 125 to 130,000 plants per acre. So you have to always calculate that into your stand or into your calculations. So when you're ordering seed, it's always important to order more seed than what you kind of need. So that way you have a little bit of wiggle room in there with planting rates. Because unlike soybeans, where you can, if you have a little lower stand, they tend to compensate well and you can keep the weeds out of it. Dry beans, you want to keep your plant population up to make sure that you're you have enough plants to work with. I talked about that dry seed before. Basically, the seed can be quite dry coming out of the US, and just watch your air volumes. A couple last slides here that I have. Staging is important when it comes to weed control in dry beans. You know, control those weeds in edible beans early. So a lot of growers like to use some type of pre-emergent product on there just to help give them a good start. Scout your fields regularly, make sure that you're on top of your weed control and know your staging and know what products you can spray and when you can't. Few other things, just a quick listing here of some of the before and after seeding products prior to emergence, things like Goldwing permit, aim with glyphosates. Those products can be used to give you a nice clean start. Pre-planned incorporated products like Treflan, Edge, Eptan, Frontier, those products can be used as well. It's always good to kind of start with a good base when it comes to weed control. Follow up with scouting after crop emergence, making sure you know what weed populations are there, identify those weeds and use the appropriate products. There are a great listing. This is an older slide, but in the guide to crop protection, they will have a in the table for dry beans. They broke it up a bit differently this year, so they'll have their top section of the table, which will have your pre-emergent with residual products in it, and the rest of the table will be your post-emergent products here. So, you know, products. There's a number of good products that you can use. You just have to be on top and watch your staging. With that being said, that's all I have for today, Lionel. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll let you take it over.
Okay, Dennis. If I could, there's a couple questions.
Sure.
One question is, when you had your hula hoops there and you're doing your stand counts, how many plants were you getting in the first, second, and well, I guess it doesn't matter for the high one, but the first and second hula hoop, how many plants?
If you're using a 28.25-inch hula hoop, what you should be shooting for is, if you're at 14 plants, 14 times 10,000 would be 140,000 plants. So if you're getting 20 in that hula hoop, then you're at 200,000 plants. So that's the importance of using, when you have a hula hoop, that you can actually, when you buy one of those, do your measurement diameter across. If you're at 28.25 inches, great. If you're a little bigger than that, you can actually pull that little tab off and readjust it so you do get your 28.25, because then basically it's just a quick multiplication factor. So.
Okay, and you mentioned about seeding shallow for soybeans. How deep is too deep? How deep will they come from?
Well, typically 2 inches is probably the max that I'd like to see soybeans, only if you have to go down to get moisture. This year, I don't think we need to do that. 3/4 of an inch is as shallow as I'd like to see it, just because anything less than that, that's topsoil can dry off so quickly if you get some warm, windy days. So that's kind of what. So basically, 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches is kind of the recommendation. If you have to go a little deeper, 2 inches would be max. Anything deeper than that, you probably had a problem with your seeding equipment and you got it in too deep. And that's going to be, that's a pretty hard push. I've seen soybeans in plots push from 3 inches, but that stand did not look very good. It just plants didn't all make it through. So that would be way too deep for me.
Okay, yeah, no, that question actually comes from me. I was talking to a producer yesterday, and his headlands, he said he got them. He says they're close to 3 inches, and
Yep.
so he was just wondering if he's going to have a problem there.
For the headlands, I would probably say they'll probably push through there. Especially if you get some warmer conditions. I wouldn't go replant them quite yet, and I guess I'm assuming they've only been in for about a week so far, if that. Yeah. So I'd give it a little bit of time yet, but the headlands are always kind of one of those things that things just don't come up as nicely, irregardless of what depth you planted at. It's just all the compaction and traveling on it. So just keep an eye on it. But yeah, it's not. If it was a whole field like that, then it would be a different consideration. But just the headlines, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I think you just might have a few less plants come up. So.
And one final one is, how long do you wait before you start making a decision? I know that's always the question you get is, so are they going to still come, or what should I do? And Do you have to start seeing dead carcasses, or do you, how long do you wait, or how long would you wait?
Okay, so you're talking if the beans were up and they froze. Is that what you're?
No, no, more of they're not coming up, and you're seeing them trying to come through, but do you see classic symptoms like you would for wheat, where it starts uh, accordions type look
Yep.
to the plants,
Yep.
or
Well, in years of experience here, I've seen beans planted on May 1st, not emerge until May 28th, and the stand was fine in the end.
okay, good.
So based on the conditions here this year, you would typically like to see beans popping, in 2 weeks. I think by 2 weeks they should be kind of all up already, especially this late in the season. If they're not pushing in 2 weeks, then I would start digging and seeing, how deep you planted them, what's happening with that seed. Because at a certain point, depending, like we're only May 22nd here, so it should be fine. Now, I did see something last year that I've never seen before, and I don't know if it's something that we could ever see again, but had a grower that planted, 160,000 seeds per acre and only had 80,000 seeds emerge. And the reason for that was because it was moisture conditions were so variable and that seed was sitting in dry soil. And that particular stand actually, those beans actually didn't come up until probably the end of June, like the remainder of that. And in the end, because it was soybeans and the way they mature, yield was fine in the end, but there wasn't quite enough moisture there. So at this point, 2 weeks, you should definitely start to see some beans popping through, especially now if we're going to get a little bit more rain and some heat coming up. So that's what I would do on that. So
Great. Well, thanks, Dennis.
thank
I
you.
know you're busy, but if you that was good for you to come on today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so just a few highlights or crop update highlights of the crop report. Where are we at in seeding? Well, right now for a province, we're about 47% complete. We've had really good progress in the last, I guess it's been 2 weeks since we've talked, I guess. So the majority of the progress has been in cereals. I think a lot of producers are if they're not getting close to wrapping up, are actually starting to wrap up some of their cereals. So it's probably by the end of this week, I would think our percentages are going to be fairly high there. I would see that the peas are just about completed, so 90% complete. Again, it'd just be the odd field still going in. Um, with canola, I think, and we're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later in our crop scouting panel, but I think we're only at about 20%. And I think some of the producers were maybe waiting for some better growing conditions before they got too crazy going into canola. Bruce has been planting a variety of the crops based on the soil conditions and the weather conditions. I know some guys have been jumping back and forth, and whether they're sowing their sunflowers, whether they're sowing their corn, whether they're sowing their cereal crops. If the fields are right and ready to go, I think a lot of producers have been doing that. Um, Soybeans, like Dennis mentioned, they're in the 34% complete. I think a lot of producers, if they don't have theirs in right by now, they're in the process of putting them in. And I think probably if the weather holds out, we'll see a lot of that being completed by the end of next week. And again, just right now, I think guys are going to start going from field to field. So where does that put us for long-term averages? Right now, we're at 47%. Our average is right around 52%. So I think we're pretty much right on track for where we should be for this time of year. And I think producers are gonna see that jump in the next couple days or next couple weeks here. One of the things I wanted to put up is our average days for our last spring frost. And I think the reason I put this up is a little bit for the forecast that they're talking. It's supposed to get a little bit cool tonight. I think they're talking low of 1 in a lot of areas. So if we're dropping to 1, some areas are definitely going to experience some frost conditions. So I don't think we're going to see, and should never say that, but I don't think we're going to see a lot of areas where we'll see much crop damage. But I think as in most cases, the cereal crops are up and they can handle a fair bit of frost. And Dennis mentioned that the soybeans can handle a little bit of frost as well. So I think we're going to be okay there. But again, just an example of how cool it can get and where we sit. But when you look at the majority, we're looking at May the 16th to May the 19th is kind of our the lighter brown areas, and those are the areas that would experience that would be the days for the spring frost. So we're right in that time period. So nothing out of the ordinary to see temperatures get this cool. But we're also going to be maybe experiencing some rainfall here in the next few days too. So again, I don't think a frost would do any damage right now, but I think it's something that we still need to be watching for. And where are we sitting right now to our crop yield and our response to seeding dates? And when we look at where we are now, we're the basically getting into the third week of May, and we're seeing a lot of crops that are just going to start dropping below that 100% potential for yield average. So again, it's going to be a busy week for guys getting crop in, and I think next week and a half here we'll see a lot of that crop going in. So we're still not in the panic time period, that's for sure, but I think a lot of producers are starting to get going on all the crops now. I think some guys have taken a little bit of time off, waiting for the right conditions, but it's time, I think, to go. So with that, there's been some questions that have come in over the last week or so, I guess almost 2 weeks now, and I wanted to address a few of them this week. And the first one is going to go to John Gavlosky, and some producers are starting to wonder about the grasshopper situation this spring, weather conditions we've been getting, whether that's going to have any effect on them, and also what has he been seeing for flea beetles, and if there any activity, or has he been seeing any activity to date? So, John, if you're on, can you address that?
Yeah, so regarding the first question on grasshoppers, hatch should be just starting in some areas, cooler areas. It might be another week or so. We're probably a little bit on the early side this year, and that's a combination of a couple of things, spring temperatures, but also what happened late last summer. So what happens with our pest species, the grasshoppers, they lay their eggs, the eggs start developing, but the eggs won't hatch. The eggs need this period of cold before they're going to hatch. So you won't get the eggs hatching in late summer, but you do get what we call embryonic development happening in those eggs. And the more of that development that happens in the late summer or fall, the earlier they potentially can hatch the next season. So we did have well above average September in particular, which would have been good for those eggs to be nice and developed. We did have some warmer temperature early on. It's been a bit cooler recently, but we're probably still ahead of schedule as far as the overall grasshopper development goes. So again, some areas I would expect hatch would just be starting. I doubt you'll see any sizable numbers for a while. We'd be at the very beginning of the hatch at best. Cooler areas, again, it might be a while yet. We do have some heavy rains forecasted for later in the week. And one of the questions that often comes up is, if a ditch is flooded for a while or a field is underwater for a few days, will that do anything to the grasshoppers? If there's still eggs, the answer is no. The eggs will survive days underwater. Uh, if there are newly emerged nymphs when you get flooded conditions, that certainly can kill newly emerged nymphs, but we would again be at the very beginning of our hatch at best. So if we do get some excessive moisture later in the week in some areas, I don't know that will have a huge impact at this point on the grasshoppers. Regarding flea beetles, they're out. Stripes have been out for a few weeks. Striped flea beetles usually come out first. They're a bit more cold hardy than the crucifer flea beetles, so they come out a bit earlier. The crucifers are starting to come out as well. It would still be in most areas primarily stripes that you would see, but over the next couple weeks, in a lot of areas that will shift, and you will get more and more crucifer flea beetles emerging. So they are out. I haven't had any reports of damage yet, but that's probably because not a lot of canola is up yet. So the flea beetles right now are feeding on volunteer canola and things like that. My gut feeling is the amount of damage we'll see and the amount of foliar spraying we will see will depend on how likely the canola is to get from the seeding date to 3 to 4 leaf stage in 3 to 4 weeks. If we have good soil moisture and we get a bit of heat shortly after seeding, that can often get you through that vulnerable period without significant damage. Problem years happen when conditions make the canola sit in that seedling stage for extended periods. So hopefully, if we do have good soil moisture, the seed treatments can help get us through without any significant damage.
Okay, John, we talked a bit about for grasshopper control. Is there a program, or can you maybe describe a bit about that program that's available to RMs?
Yeah, so in some years, you get a very heavy grasshopper populations developing on land that is not farmland. It's basically either municipal land or provincial land. We do have a program for rural municipalities. If somebody from their office, usually it's the weed supervisors, if they are going to be involved in grasshopper control on municipal property, we have a rebate program where, depending on when they spray and where the land is, they can get anywhere from about 30 to 60% rebate for the grasshopper control. So we'll cover a rebate for both the insecticide cost and the application cost. The information on the program was sent out to all rural municipalities, as well as our crop extension specialists. And so, yeah, if you notice very heavy populations on municipal land that is adjacent to a farm field, you could let your municipality know. Some municipalities do get involved in the program. In recent years, it's been mainly eco bait that they've been using, but they can either do a foliar or the brand bait. A lot of municipalities have stopped doing grasshopper control. They just don't have the people to do it, or the equipment, I guess. There are still some that do. So it's just a program we offer to assist municipalities if they're involved in grasshopper control.
Okay, good. Thanks, John. Okay, next questions for Sonia, and we're gonna keep talking about canola here. And one of the things wanted her to discuss was we're seeing a lot of new technology with some of our seeding equipment and becoming more and more accurate. And was wanting her to maybe talk about some of the risks of reducing our seeding rates and how low can you go, and then Also her opinion on, when's the right time to be planting your canola, because we did have producers waiting here, and when does the calendar start becoming a concern? So Sonia, I think you've got a few things to address these questions.
Yeah, thanks, Lionel. So first question here. So what are the risks of reducing rates? How low is too low? So even with your equipment, whatever equipment you're using, you still want, that ideal canola plant stand of 5 to 8 plants per square foot. So that's still what you're going to be going for. And just some of the risks. So if you're choosing to go, lower than that, there's been research that if you have, really low, like less than 2 plants, you've gone for less than 2 plants per square foot, you're having for sure, yield loss there. And even with 3 to 4, there's still going to be a yield potential drop off. So there's a lot of benefits for going and trying to achieve that 5 to 8 plants per square foot. And if you go too low, some of the reasons here that's just not optimal is because, especially with canola, you're going to get, increased branching. It's going to grow to fill that space, if it has space. And so you're going to have more branching, and that's going to have effects of, delaying your flowering and potentially, affecting your harvest there, in terms of your maturity. Also, you're not going to have that canopy closed. So in terms of weed management, you might have to be doing another spray. It's not going to close and cover like you would want with that stand of 5 to 8 plants per square foot. Again, also higher insect pressure per plant. So, when we're talking about flea beetles, you have, a set number in a field. And if you have less plants, that's more pressure per plant, right? Than if you have that 5 to 8, which gives you a bit of buffer. Also, just looking at wind effects, if you have too low of a stand, you're going to set yourself up for more potential shatter and pod drop there and wind events. It's not going to have as much, um, you know, stand protection around it. And then kind of the final point, going too low, your plants aren't necessarily going to be able to fully utilize, the moisture, sun, and fertilizer that you've put down in that investment. So those would be some of the challenges here if you're going too low, and what you would run into risk of. So I'll move here to the second question. So in terms of what are the, ideal seeding conditions, we've seen in the spring here being a couple, bit colder, and then getting some moisture more lately here. And really for canola, like John has said, it's really important that, you're putting in that seed and it's getting to that 3 to 4 leaf stage, getting out of that vulnerable stage in 3 to 4 weeks, like ideally 3 weeks. If you've, with your treated seed, that would, you know, give you that coverage for that time, and you're going to be getting out of that vulnerable stage to really set up an established crop for success. So really your optimal soil temperature that you're aiming for is about 10 degrees for canola. Some people, you can go a bit earlier, 5 to 10, but the optimal is definitely 10 to give it the best chance of the small seed to get out of the ground to that 3 to 4 leaves in 3 to 4 weeks. It is, can be susceptible again to spring frost. So again, waiting for that bit warmer soil temperature. And again, it's going to more effectively use your seed treatment window if you're waiting there for a bit warmer at that at least 10-degree soil temperature. And then again, moisture, it's a small seed. It plays a big part, of course, in canola emergence. So also waiting for, if you can wait for moisture right in that top where the seed is placed is great. And then just you can change your depth a little bit depending on the conditions, but moisture will play a big role, as well as your seed bed in that emergence and establishing a great canola crop for your season. So yeah, hopefully does that answer all the questions there, Lionel?
Okay, well, regarding the, I guess, seed bed,
Mhm.
If producers are concerned with the soil temperature staying cool, would it be, what do you think about going out there and actually doing some tillage to try to get rid of some of the trash just to warm things up? Or is that just going to dry things out and kind of go from one problem seeding into cool soil to seeding into dry soil?
Yeah, I think again, it would really depend on your moisture. I think you could, yeah, do a little bit just seeing what's coming up, but yeah, the moisture is going to be a big, um, yeah, that would probably be your top priority there.
Okay, and so you're saying 5 to 8 plants.
Yeah.
I guess it's going to depend on your seed lot then as to how low or how many pounds you should be looking at seeding. But on average, what would that be on pounds per acre?
Yeah, so you're probably looking at, a lower rate, you're probably looking at about 3.9, 4.1 pounds per acre, and can go up to, 5.1, 5.5. But again, yeah, looking at your 1,000 seed weight on your bag for your seed lot, and using, you can use the seeding rate calculators, etc., and put in what your target plant density is. That'll give you your seeding rate that you should go for.
Okay, and that seeding rate calculator is on our website, right?
Yeah, so Mask has one. There's a seeding rate calculator. Also, where you buy your canola from, they'll also have and Canola Council. So you have lots of options there that you can choose from.
Perfect. Yeah, good. Okay. Thanks, Sonia. Just going to check with Aaron to see if we have any questions that I might have missed.
No questions. There was just one comment that was made about the grasshoppers that they're seeing the oddly new hatched hoppers yesterday.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for that. And I'm not sure if John's still on, but I'm not sure if he's been seeing any hatched ones yet or not, but just they're starting, I guess.
Yeah, there's a few, again, low levels, newly hatched. I have seen and had a couple reports of larger grasshoppers as well. And just a reminder that there are a few species of grasshoppers that they're not pest species. They overwinter as nymphs instead of as eggs, and they will be larger early. The one report I had was from a pasture area where that's a situation where we often find these larger grasshoppers early. Pastures, often some of your grassy vegetation around fields. So again, just if you do see the odd large grasshopper right now, so larger meaning late instar nymphs, um, that doesn't mean that they're off to a really early start. It just it's one of those non-pest species that overwinters as a nymph.
Good. Thanks, John. Okay, just a few things in closing today. There's a weed seeding ID day actually today in Carmen, and I think it started already. So if you rush and you're close to Carmen, you could probably still take in part of the day. I think it would probably run for a couple hours. If not, on May the 28th at the North Hill at the Assiniboine Community College in Brandon here, there'll be one from 9 to 1 o'clock. So if you're interested in getting a little bit more information and updating your weed IDs, be a good class to attend and get some more information. Our field crop production guide is available. So we're getting into we've been spraying for, I guess, pre-emergence, and now we're going to be looking at post-emergence. So if you're spraying at all, you should probably have one of these books with you, just so you have a little bit of a Bible to go back to see what rates are, what conditions should be when you're spraying. So definitely a good book to have. Manitoba hay listing. Again, if you've got hay for sale, there's a good place to put it on. Some guys are still looking to buy feed. If they're not looking for this year, they're looking to buy for next year already. So if you've got some that's extra, I would take advantage of that. Our crop protection extension specialists, here's our contact information throughout the province. locations and phone numbers. So if you got any questions, give us a call and we'll do our best to give you a hand figuring things out. Our livestock people in the province, again, a lot of pasture questions coming up right now. So if you got any questions regarding cattle going to pasture, definitely give any one of these people a call. Our crop MASC service centers, here's the phone numbers and their locations. So if you got questions, call there. And if you've got questions for myself or Lori, there's my number, our email addresses. And join us for CropTalk. I just noticed my mistake there. It's not May of 92. It should be May 29th of next year. So of this year, sorry. So definitely keep that date right. It's May the 29th of 2024 is our next CropTalk. And thanks for joining, and we will see you again next week.